Um, but don't be sad for me because God was in my life from the very beginning. hmm And a lot of people ask me when I am talking about my faith, when I came to Christ. And that is something that I always ponder because I've never not known him. I may not have known his name. I may not have known what this wonderful being was that constantly protected me throughout my life. But he was always there for me. So, my story starts, I was about 1.5, 2 years old. And the reason I know that is because I was walking. And the reason I know that is because I lived in a little village outside of Seoul, Korea. And I don't know if you know, rice paddies are probably about 2 feet deep, and I couldn't touch the bottom. And so I would swim. And quite often, all we would have is rice porridge, which is just rice in boiled water, and that was your meal. And you had one meal a day. And we were very fortunate if we had any meat, and we grew our own vegetables. So I've known hunger, but I was very happy. I felt blessed. I did not want for anything, I felt, at that time, just because the love of God was always with me, always. When I was hungry, I would catch frogs, and they were big fat frogs with really nice juicy frog legs. So, if I wanted to make my mom and dad very happy, I would catch quite a few as a little girl, and I would bring them home and say, "Look, Mom, we've got meat for dinner." And Dad would come home for a meal, and he'd be so happy because we would have meat on the table. I loved my parents. And it's tough to say that you have an unconditional love for your parents, no matter what, no matter how awful they are. And my father, my biological father, was a terrible alcoholic, very mean, very vicious, and very cruel to my mother, very cruel. I had an older brother, he was several years older than me, and a younger brother who was born a few years after me. If you're not familiar, in the Korean culture, women at that time don't have much of a status. They're basically a belonging. And so when they are married off, they have to have a dowry, otherwise they're not worth much of anything. My father's property was, to say the least, he did not value her and did not treat her very well at all. And when he would come home in a drunken stupor, he would beat her in front of us and violate her because we lived in a one-room shack, thatched roof with a dirt floor and just a fire pit that was just a hole in the ground. This happened for several years, and my mother ran away. And because women have no rights, he was able to find her within a very short amount of time and brought her back. And the beating that she took was immense. It had a huge impact on my older brother. He tried to help, and unfortunately he was beaten as well for this. And the impact is instead of taking that and seeing it as doing the right thing, he took that to mean that it was his turn to beat somebody else. And you probably understand that I was the next person in line. God watched over me, because how is a little girl who is maybe 2 years old at this time understand and know that this was coming? But I did. And that was amazing, because I knew. And God told me, run. And I ran. I ran and I hid. I hid and I was quiet and I cried because I felt so scared. And I was right to be scared. And this had happened on more than one occasion. But I was able to live through that and not take it to mean that he was not with me. He was actually covering me and protecting me this whole time. My mother was finally able to run away a final time. We were at the river. I was probably 3 or 4 years old at this time. And we were at the stream doing the laundry on the rocks. And she told me, go see your dad at his work. It was probably, I don't know. It took me half the day to get there and half to get back. So I went to my father to get some money for whatever it is that she needed. And when I got back, she was gone. The laundry was still there by the stream, waiting for me to finish and take home. This time, my father did not go back for her. Thank God. She made it out. I never heard from her again, never saw her again. And my father decided that because he was a single father, he could not watch 3 children at home, and we moved into the outskirts of Seoul, Korea. And we lived with my grandparents on my father's side. And basically, we did not go to school. We were wild children, my younger brother and I. The railroad tracks weren't very far away, and we would just play all day long. And this was not healthy. My older brother had to go to work because he was now old enough to be able to make money for the family. So my father, thank God, decided to put us in an orphanage. Now, understand, in the Korean culture, it is okay to sell your children for money. To sell your child, especially a daughter, to a brothel was quite common. Quite common. And to sell your younger son, if you have a younger son, into slavery. Okay? So imagine 2 young kids who my father could have made money on, but he didn't. Okay? And it was perfectly okay in that culture and in that time. I should not have been here. I should have been in a brothel. But God, again, worked miracles in my life and sent me to an orphanage. Now, was I happy about this? No. My father took us onto the streets of Seoul, Korea, and they have vendors just selling sweets and candies. And we spent the day with my father and had such a joyous time, my brother and I. And I was 4, and my brother was probably about 2 years old because he was walking and talking, much to my dismay. And I remember that as we were walking along, this car pulls up, and my dad says, I love you both very much, and I cannot take care of you. So he hands us 2 big bags of candy, one for each of us, and puts us in the car. And we're crying and saying, we will be good, Daddy. We will help. We will be good children. But he does the right thing. He puts us in that car and sends us off to that orphanage. Now, I don't remember how long we stayed at that orphanage, but I do remember a room probably about the size of this here. And I do remember the girls were all sequestered in one room and the boys in another. You had a mat, and you slept on the mat, and you all slept together in that one room. And you could not get up because in the middle of the night you would have stepped on somebody because that's how tight we were. That's how full that room was. And we all worked together because there was very few people, and it was run by a Catholic church, and there were nuns that basically ran it, and we had to grow our food. Very little was ever wasted. I remember they gave me a haircut, and I was very, very upset because, needless to say, I was crying quite a bit. But the view from that orphanage was amazing. It's hard to believe nowadays because everybody wants a view, and they want to be in that part of town where it's like, oh, this is the best part of town to be in. Well, this hillside, was actually considered terrible, and that's why the orphanage was there, is because it was on the side of a hill, and it basically did not have a good property where you could grow things. It was much harder. They weren't thinking of the view. But I do remember swinging, and that there was a swing, and I could actually see out into the ocean and see the lights of the city, and it was the most beautiful sight. And I really enjoyed it there. Life was good. I could not complain. It was wonderful. And then when I was 5 years old, I was adopted by a wonderful family here in the United States. And I remember my plane ride. Boy, was that scary. My brother and I, we didn't know what a plane was. We didn't know what an airport was. Least of all, climbing up in the air and being in the clouds. And that was the most amazing sight. And I got to sit by the window because I was the older sibling. And I looked down, and the patches of agriculture looked like a quilt. It was so beautiful, just lovely. We landed. I met my new parents. My mother and father basically could not have children of their own, so they had actually adopted 2 children before us. My father was a retired military civilian. He was actually in the military, but then he worked as a civilian as well. He was a civil engineer, and he worked for Northwest Airlines out of Bismarck, North Dakota. They were quite unusual couple because they were actually adopting children that were not Caucasian. And I remember that we were actually on the news, and they did a spread on us, and we were televised. So, yes, you're talking to a TV star. Life was really good. I went from abject poverty to a lifestyle that people would kill for, literally. Robin and Russell were both pilots, had a pilot's license, owned their own aircraft, and were very well off. And that's how they were able to afford being able to adopt so many children. And as a child, you don't understand these things. All you know is that you are not hungry anymore. You have a roof over your head, and you have 2 parents that love you unconditionally and support you. Unfortunately, it was not meant to last. My 2 older siblings, the devil works really hard to make life really difficult for you. But my 2 older siblings, the oldest had come from a family where she was also poor and did not know the good life. But once she did, she wanted more of it and didn't care how she got it. She was off in college. My parents bought her a car, and the very next day that she got the car, she wrecked it. She was in a car accident. My parents basically told her that no, they were not going to buy her another vehicle. This made her very, very angry. Extremely angry. This stewed in her for a while. We didn't know this. And she was off in college, so there was nothing to know about that. She came home for the holidays, and needless to say, she talked to her brother. They were siblings. They grew up together. And he was under the age of 16. She was 18. He was 15 years old. My father, because he was in the military, had a gun collection in a safe and had been teaching his oldest son about guns, how to clean them, maintain them, and use them properly. So he had access to the safe. One night, all I heard is, let me start over. One night, it was very cold out, and it's close to Thanksgiving. And when you're a kid, you don't want to wake everybody up. So I tiptoed to the bathroom, went potty, and then tiptoed back to bed. My parents were in the process of adopting 3 more children, but the adoption had not been finalized, and I was deliriously happy because I had siblings that were my age, girls, that I could play with, and I didn't have to play with my little brother all the time. And I went back to bed, and just as I'm dozing off, I hear what sounds like a firecracker, and I'm thinking, it's part of my dream, and I fall back to sleep. In the morning, when I'm waking up, I'm always the first one up. I get up, and my sister comes and says, no, you need to stay in your room. And of course, and then she goes away. And of course, being a dutiful young girl and very inquisitive, I did not obey. I went down the hall, and all I saw in my mom and dad's bedroom were white sheets. I did not like white sheets for a very long time. And a black body bag being taken out the front door. And I heard an ambulance going away from the house. The next part that I remember is going to the courthouse and sitting outside the courthouse as a jury was convicting my 15-year-old brother of murder. And he confessed to it. And basically he covered for his older sister and said she had nothing to do with it. Even though the court knew, and everybody else in that courtroom knew, that this young man didn't have it in him because the fingerprints were his and he had done it, but he was not the orchestrator. He was not the mastermind. She got away with it. I sat outside that front door, and all I could think was, what is going on? Nobody would tell me anything. And you know, I felt the presence of the Lord the whole time. He continued to stay with me. And at those moments in my life where it was the the hardest struggles, where I felt the lowest in my life, I knew he was still there. My parents, Robin and Russell, were very, very strict Christians. I don't know if you know Missouri Synod Lutheran. Basically, no electronics. You could drive a car, but men and women always had to be accompanied. They could never be alone in a room together, except for husband and wife. And I knew God, and I knew that my sister knew God. She'd been baptized and had said that she was a believer. I didn't realize at that moment how far she had drifted away from Christ. How easy it is for somebody to be so caught up in their own life, in their own way, to lose sight of what God's plan is for each of us, and how we need to be focused on God always and not on our own. My life doesn't end there, obviously. My parents had a wonderful couple that they were very, very good friends with. And so they were my foster parents for about 6 months. What I didn't understand is that why we were staying with these foster parents who were wonderful when all these people wanted to adopt my brother and myself. But why didn't they want to adopt the 3 siblings that my parents had not finalized the adoption yet? Nobody came to see them. Nobody wanted them. Money does really, really awful things to people. Really awful. It just makes them so concentrated on other things that don't matter. But that's why my brother and I were so popular. Every single every single person my mom and dad knew came out of the woodwork. Both of my parents were only children. So we had no aunts and uncles or close siblings. Our grandparents were dead. So we had nobody. But every single friend that my folks knew came out of the woodwork, even those that owed them a lot of money. And, of course, my sister got away with murder, and she was the first one queued up in line. Do you know she inherited 80% of all the money? And my brother and I each got about 10%. And she wanted the rest. It wasn't enough that she had 80% and that she had made her younger brother go to juvenile hall, juvie, until he was 18 for her crimes, for what she wanted. God again works in my life and sends us a social worker that's just amazing. Amazing. She saw through all of these people. She saw how corrupt and unloving and how horrible these people would be to my brother and I just because of what we came with. And she found my current parents, Dale and Ken. They wanted to adopt a young girl because they already had 2 boys. And the social worker basically told them, if you want to adopt her, you have to adopt her baby brother too. So to this day, I still tell my brother, I said, see, if it wasn't for me, you would have had a crappy life. Dale and Ken are just a wonderful couple. They have raised my brothers and I in such a Christian home. And throughout all of this, I knew God was always there. And I have never forgotten how much he has worked in my life. When I was in school, all the trauma that had happened finally came to a head. I was 9 years old. That's a lot for a 9-year-old to go through. A lot. And I was lashing out a lot. Let me just say that the principal's office was not foreign territory to me. And let me say the teachers all knew that I was very temperamental and to not get on my bad side because I didn't care who you were. I didn't care who your mama was, who your daddy was, or who you knew, because I had a fire in me that just was not going to be put out. Let me just say that I beat up the bully and made sure that he was no longer a bully. And one of my classmates who had been held back several years, I didn't know he liked me, and that's why he teased me. But needless to say, I sent him home with a black eye and a bloody nose. And he had 100 pounds on me. I was probably 60 pounds dripping wet at the time. Life went on, and I learned to control my temper, and basically I would have outbursts. And that went on for a while until college hit. And having God in your life doesn't mean that you know when to ask him for help. And you need to learn when to do that. And sometimes when you're young, you're invincible. You can do everything. You don't need help from anyone, and you can do it yourself. My freshman year at UND was fine. I made it through okay. My second year, not so much. I had a complete mental breakdown. And I was living off campus in my own apartment. And all the stuff that had gone on in my life, I'd never really talked about it or come to terms with what had happened to me. So I broke down, and of course, I call one of my parents. Now, growing up, the person that I was closest to was my father, because he and I have very similar personalities. But this time, I called my mom. Now, why in the world, at that moment in time, would I call my mom when the person I am closest to is my father? I mean, my father is the one who went and helped me buy my prom dress, okay? That's how close he and I were. But no, I called my mom, and my mom came up because, of course, God is working in my life, and I've always felt close to him. I've never felt far away from him. And whenever he spoke, I listened. I heard, and I did what he said. And when he told me to call my mom, I did. My mom stayed with me and helped me And I could not leave that apartment for 7 whole days. 7 whole days. Now, this is a person who is an extrovert, outgoing, who is always out there meeting people, never afraid of anything. And I am sequestered and I just can't do anything. I'm immobilized. My mother found me an excellent psychiatrist who helped me work through everything. She was just amazing. Got me back on my feet, helped me to understand, and helped me to learn how to talk about what happened the first 9 years of my life so that I could move forward and be able to come to terms with the things that happened and know that during that time, God was working through me to teach me that those struggles that I was going through was to help make me a better person. Each and every day, you and I all have our own hurts, our own pains that we have gone through in our lives. And what happens? We make a choice. We make a choice to listen to the devil, or we make a choice to listen to God. It took me over 20 years to be able to forgive my sister. 20 years. I said the words, yeah, I forgive her, but did I mean it? No, I didn't mean it. I kept saying it over and over in my head, but I could never forgive her. Do you know what happened to her? She spent that money so fast, it wasn't even funny. When she was in college, she flaunted it. She flaunted how much money she had. It was like a kid in a candy store who suddenly had $1 million. She bought expensive cars, and not just 1 or 2 and paid cash. She bought several. She had 2 to 3 homes that she had paid cash for. And men queued up, of course. They helped her spend that money. Of course. Why not? She went through that money so fast that when my brother and I were in high school, he was probably a freshman, and I was sophomore, junior. She had never given up trying to get to us. The devil keeps working, always, always, and always be on guard. She finally got a message through to my brother, and first thing she does is asks for money. We didn't inherit our money until we were 18. So she wasn't going to be able to access his, but she didn't know that. Not yet. She had sent a private investigator to keep tabs on us and find us. And my brother went to my mom and dad and asked for the money so he could send her that $10,000. She'd run out of money. She'd spent it so fast. That took her only 4 or 5 years. 4 or 5 years. She's now living off the state, has several children from several different fathers, and I pray for her. I ask the Lord to forgive her and Help her to learn from her mistakes so that she won't pass it on to her kids and her grandchildren or whoever else she may be in contact with. Her brother that she had lured into her maniacal dealings. I have no contact with him. We don't know where he is. He basically figured out what she had done, and although he would never testify against her and wouldn't say anything, he cut off all ties to her and would not speak to her again. The impact she had on the lives of 5 kids, 5 children. My 3 younger, almost adopted siblings were fortunately adopted by one single family, but that trauma was too much. And one of my sisters, we don't know where she is. Trauma upon trauma was too much. She'd already come from a traumatic home, from a very physically and mentally abusive home, and for her to deal with a murder of an approaching parent was too much for her. She couldn't take it. So I pray for her because I don't know where she is, and nobody does. And I'm grateful that my other 2 siblings are doing very well. I got lost at one point is because I wanted to do God's work. I was reading in my devotions this morning, and the story of Martha came to mind because sometimes we get so lost in the preparations and wanting to do good that we lose focus. We lose focus on God, and we lose focus on why we are doing this, what we are doing this for. And I just want to leave you with this, is that no matter where you are in your life, no matter what is going on, God is always there with you, no matter what. He may be very, very silent because he's waiting for you to listen. And he's waiting for you to hear. Thank you.